The West Ham Massive are pleased to support Iron Supporting Food Banks. They are a group of West Ham fans and friends inspired by the work of other football food banks around the country. They collect food and cash donations for a Newham Food Bank in Beckton, who supplies 7 distribution centres in the borough 7 days a week and hand out several hundred 3-day emergency food packs every month to families in need. They are also working with other groups to improve conditions for vulnerable adults and children in the Newham community. You can help by making a donation to their Just Giving page. You will find the link to this in the description section of the video details in this stream. Thanks for your support. Come on, you Irons. I'd like to implore you guys watching to please don't forget to like, comment on and share this stream to your social media platforms. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, and make sure you hit that bell icon for alerts on new content. And as always, guys, we thank you very much indeed for your support in this matter. We are here for the latest installment in this ongoing series, Mount Rushmore. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with this concept, allow me to explain. So we get a guest in and we donate to them the side of a mountain, essentially, like Mount Rushmore, where you have the heads of the 4 US presidents carved into the side of them. Well, our guest will carve into the side of their mountain the heads of 4 West Ham players that they have seen during their time following the club. Now, they could go route 1 and they could pick the best of the best, the most skilled players. But they might choose a slightly different route. They might perhaps choose cult heroes. They might choose academy graduates. They might choose bad boys. They might even choose someone just because they quite like them as a person. Any combination of the above, or indeed something completely different. It's their mountain. They can decorate it how they want. So, in the hot seat today, we have author, journalist, podcaster, West Ham fan, Mr. Sam Delaney. How are you, sir?
I'm not bad, Rob. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, it's our delight and pleasure to host you on the channel for your debut, sir.
Well, I'm delighted to have been invited, and I'm looking forward to making my choice. I love this idea, so I'm very excited about outlining my 4 gigantic rock heads.
Well, I'm going to be the one that's footing the ladder, Sam. You're going to be the one that's going to the top of the ladder with your hammer in one hand, your chisel in the other. And of course, you've had a little bit of time to sort of go onto YouTube and do video tutorials on stonemasonry and things like that to make sure that this is a fitting tribute to these 4 fine figures of men that have pulled on the claret and blue over your tenure as a West Ham fan. So let's get straight to it then, Sam. You're up the ladder there. You're chipping away there at the face. What's the first one that you're going to choose for me, and what's your story as to why?
Let me just... okay, so I'm going to go first with Mark Ward. Okay, so many reasons. And I should say as well, I hear what you said at the beginning. It's good to theme these choices, but I want to make it clear from the beginning is that these are completely random. Obviously, I've been following West Ham my whole life, and it was almost like a roulette wheel of iconic players, right? I do really genuinely love all 4 of the ones I've chosen today. Probably above all, I love Mark Ward because he's a guy who I count as a mate. I got to know him a few years when I met him once in the noughties, and it was a few years before he ended up in jail. And then when he did go into prison, we stayed in touch because he knew I was a journalist and he wanted to get his side of the story out there about what had happened to him. And so I ended up sort of being a pen pal to him in prison, which to me was an amazing thing because in the 80s, when I was a schoolboy and that Boys of 86 team were flying, obviously I liked Cotty and McAvenny like everyone did. Yep. But third in the Hammer of the Year that season was Mark Ward. And in many ways, I kind of loved him more because he was less of he wasn't quite as big a star as Cotty and McAvenny were, but he was scoring loads of goals and getting loads of their assists. And he was a thrilling player to watch because he had everything you want from a footballing hero. He was fast and skillful. He scored goals, he made goals, but also he was extremely aggressive. He wasn't one of these airy fairy kind of creative players. He was a really tough bloke. So he had the lot. I loved Mark Ward. And so then when I became effectively his prison pen pal 20 years later or something, it just felt so weird, like answering sometimes. I don't know how he had a phone in prison. I didn't ask how. And I think it's best we don't revisit how that situation came about. But he would occasionally call me of an evening and I'd be sat there with my girlfriend and the phone would ring and we'd be watching something. She'd go, "Oh, you got to take this." I go, "Yes, I do have to take it because it is Mark Ward, who was my boyhood hero. And now I am there for him." And we're still in touch. We've stayed in touch over the years, still in touch now. But I really love Wardy, but I think he was such a great player. And I think back to that, I mean, a player we identified and then bought from Oldham Athletic, who'd only been playing non-league like a year beforehand for Northwich Victoria. For him to get bought for next to nothing, can't remember how much it was, but next to nothing, come in to West Ham and lead the charge right from the get-go. I think he started the first game of that season, 85-86, played all the way through the season, barely missed a game, was our third best player, according to the fans' poll at the end of the year. Somehow, unbelievably, never got picked for England. But what an incredible story. I mean, now, I suppose you look at Jared Bowen, and we're all delighted by the progress he's made coming from Hull. But in comparison to Mark Ward, that's nothing. Mark Ward came up 2 divisions and hit the ground straight away. He didn't come up just from Hull, already with a tiny bit of Premier League experience, and then take a season or 2 to get going. Wardy just did it right from the off. So those are my thoughts and feelings on Mark Ward.
The thing I liked about Wardy as well, typical Scouser and a typical short man syndrome. I think he's actually said it himself. I've met Wardy on some of the after dinner sort of like events that they have, the old players and whatever. I've met him a couple of times now, and he is what he is. Do you know what I mean? He's a short. He was quite sort of like fiery player, quite combative.
He's fiery. He's
typical
spicy.
Scouser.
Well, I've told this story a few times and I often remind him of it. But the first time I ever met him, it was in a bar where there was some other players there from the same team and a mutual friend who'd sort of introduced me. And when I got introduced to Mark Ward, his first words to me, he held his hand out. He squeezed my hand so hard, I thought it was going to break off. And he went, "Sam, my name's Mark Ward, and I'm a fucking hard bastard." And I thought, wow, that's a pretty ballsy way to introduce yourself to someone. But fair enough, I don't doubt it. I said something to that effect. I said, "Look, I watched you play for West Ham for years. I know you're hard. I suppose you got to be when you're that size, haven't you?"
You could say that, Mr. Delaney. I could not possibly comment. But yeah, I mean, Wardy, he came. I mean, what was it, 4 and a bit seasons? I mean, he left. I think I saw an interview once with him. I don't think he really wanted to leave the club when it actually came to pass. It was more a difference of opinion, shall we say, with the manager at the time, Mr. Lou Macari.
I think he's very happy and open to say he absolutely hated Lou Macari.
Yes.
That was a big clash of characters. But he was one of the many lads there at the time who I think, no one could replace John Niall to them. And therefore, it's sort of like, you know what it's like? It's like if your mum and dad split up and then your mum gets a new boyfriend, and that new boyfriend could be the nicest guy in the world, but it doesn't matter because your attitude is, "You're not my real dad. Yeah. You'll never be my real dad." And that is what I think a lot of those lads felt about, Lou McCurry, I think, was a combative character who was always going to put a few noses out joint. But to be honest, it could have been anyone. I think there was players there who did feel that John Lahr was like a dad to them, and they were just furious that he'd been given the boot, and they weren't going to be happy with whoever came in.
Yeah. No, that's a fair assessment of it, Sam. Just looking here, if anybody wants any of his stats for West Ham, he played 165 league matches, 12 goals. In all competitions, he played 209 matches, 14 goals in just about 4 and a bit seasons. And still to this day, I mean, you've kind of said it, giving him a glowing tribute. And I remember Wardy as well, playing for West Ham on the right wing. And yeah, he was a fantastic player for the club. And as I say, I've seen him on the player events that they do, East 13 events, just to give him a quick plug. Why not? Hello, Ian. Hope you're well. And yeah, you can see he's still got an awful lot of love and affection for A, the club, and B, the fan base.
Yeah, he certainly has. And I think it's always tricky for him when we play Everton.
Yeah. He hopes for a draw, I think, just to keep everybody happy. But Mark Ward, there you are, Sam. You've completed the first head. The first head has been hewn out of the rock face, and it's there in all its glory. But we're not going to show the viewers just yet. I can see it looking up at the ladder, looking up at it. It's not a bad likeness, I've got to say. You've
majestic,
done well.
I would say. Yeah,
majestic. There it is. It's proudly looking out into the distance. But your hands, battered though they are, you're going to have to get back up that ladder a little bit sharpish, Sam, because you've got 3 more left. So where are we going with the next one?
The next one, I have chiseled out the fine features of a player called Hugo Porro, who was a wonderful Portuguese attacker who we signed on loan for just, I haven't done my research to remind myself of this. Let's have a look. 96-97, he played 23 games. Now, I was a student at this time, and I'd gone off to university in Sussex, and so I was living in Brighton, but me and my mate, we kept our season tickets on anyway for those 3 years, and we were both at the same union. We would just either drive or train back to every game, which was a big commitment, even on the midweek games. I'm sure there's lots of West Ham fans, by the way, who commute from Brighton anyway, but to me it felt like a big commitment. And during that period there was some ups and downs. It was the Redknapp era, and we had 1 trillion players come through the club under
revolving
Redknapp.
Door, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was very much the era of the phrase Carlos Kickable, right? And Harry Redknapp loved taking a punt on an extravagantly skilled sort of foreign player who he felt he could get something out of. And it was very, very, very hit and miss. And I would say there was marginally more misses than hits. But sometimes people are unfair, and they like to focus on Marco Bugas or Florin Radicau or Dumitrescu or whatever. But for me, Hugo Porro is to many people a forgotten gem, because he came in, I don't even know where from. In fact, let me look now. You might have it in front of you. Okay, so he's come in from Sporting Lisbon. And I think his debut, you might be able to tell me, I think it was against Forest, right? I might be wrong about that. And I saw him in the first game. And you got to remember, in the mid-90s, it was still fairly new to have skillful foreign players in the Premier League. There was a few around. I think Zola arrived around that time.
Yep.
But certainly, clubs like West Ham weren't getting the cream of the crop. And so, you'd grown up sort of watching Serie A on Channel 4 and thinking that was where all the skillful players who did tricks and flicks and dribbled with the ball came from. And we were still stuck with pretty agricultural football to a large extent. So every time a foreigner signed, you'd think maybe this is going to be it. Maybe this is our, maybe this is our Maradona, or at least our George Hargy, right? And I felt that way when this bloke, who I didn't even know what he looked like, I probably just read about him on teletext, turns out, and his debut was just exceptional. It was absolutely exceptional. I think he scored, but every time this kid got the ball, he was taking the mickey out of defenders. Yeah. He was doing everything that you, as a young football fan, wanted to see? I'm talking like nutmegs, knocking it round the player one way and running the other, just brimming with confidence, really wanting to take the piss. Basically, David Moyes' nightmare, right?
Yeah,
It's like if you can imagine the most anti-David Moyes player ever, it was Hugo Porro, because he wanted to take, he was there just to show off, right?
Yeah.
There was no kind of play the easy ball, track back, none of that. It was like, I'm here to put on a show, so buckle up because I'm going to give you one. And he had this great debut. And my mate, Nev, always reminds me that I turn around to, in those days, we were always very drunk watching the football. And we'd just be, most of the time be talking just drunken nonsense to each other. And I turned round to him and I said, from now on, this was during the game.
Yeah.
From now on, I'm not prepared to discuss anything with anyone other than Hugo Porro. That's the only subject I will talk about going forward. And he was like, oh, okay, noted, like that. And he still brings that up sometimes. He's still only willing to talk about Hugo Porro because I think he had a couple of other good games. And I was like, this is it. He's our Zola. We're going to win the league with this lad. And then we came up against Spurs, and young Sol Campbell was just emerging as like a proper defender.
Yeah.
And I think he just sort of had Porfirio on toast. And that was like, that was the beginning of the end sort of thing. I think he'd been lucky to come up against a few sort of clod-hopping, old-fashioned English centre-backs, but then he was found out a little bit. So all of my dreams never came true with him. But I have such fond memories. It's sort of like a summer love. That girl that you meet in the summer holidays and you're besotted by her and you think you're going to be in love forever. But then it kind of fizzles out by the first week in September. You go back to school and you don't think so much again about her. But those first feelings always stay with me. Hugo Porro, what a lad.
Yeah, I remember. I think you'll probably remember this as well, Sam. He played a game in, I think it was the FA Cup away at Wrexham, and the pitch was covered in snow. I mean, he'd probably never seen snow up to that point.
Yeah.
We had remember the old orange football? Had that. I think he scored a goal in that. And I same as you. I thought he was a fantastically gifted player. I take what you say about he would be David Moyes would sort of like, probably turn around and try and turn him into a right back or something like that.
Yeah, it's basically Saeed Benrahma, but times 100.
As soon as you said it, that was the first player I thought of, Benrahma. I was like, that's about right. But we hadn't had much luck with Portuguese players because obviously there'd been Darni, there'd been Paulo Futre, and then obviously Porfirio. I mean, did you when he sort of like when he rocked up? Did you sort of think about the previous experiences with the Portuguese players?
I loved those other two players as well, though. When Futre signed, I was so excited because he felt like a genuine like world class talent that we'd signed, and we knew that he'd got a lot of injuries and wasn't perhaps quite the man he once was. But nevertheless, in those days, I mean, young fans won't appreciate it now because. We could sign players we've signed players from Juventus or AC Milan, and it doesn't seem like a big deal. But back then, it really, even Serie A was so preeminent, wasn't it, in the 90s, that if you got a player who'd play for one of those big clubs like Milan or Juventus, it would just be like staggering, to a West Ham fan. And the fact that he had played for Milan, I think he'd played for loads of massive clubs. I can't remember who else, but certainly AC Milan, I think was who we signed him from. And I remember the back of the paper saying he's a 10 million man because he's accumulatively had 10 million pounds spent on transfer fees throughout his career, which again now seems like peanuts. But back then it was like, wow. And I was delighted by him. And I think, he did make a debut against Southampton in which we had a lot of skillful players on the pitch. And it did look like briefly like West Ham were going to be a budget East End Galacticos. and similarly, Darni, apart from the fact that he remains the most beautiful man to have ever played in the Premier League, in my opinion, which obviously made us all feel proud, right?
Yep.
But on top of that, I thought he was good as well. To be honest, I loved anyone those days with a trick. And I regret the fact that as you get older, you do become a little bit more cynical, and you do get a little bit more David Moyes and a little bit less Harry Redknapp. You know, Harry Redknapp, I think, kept the child inside him about football throughout his whole career and just only wanted show-offs in his teams, right? Which is great. And David Moyes has been arguably a much more successful West Ham manager than Harry Redknapp ever was, right? But he mistrusts creativity and spontaneity, you know. And I get that. And I get that's probably why he's had the success he's had with us. But in a way, I feel ashamed of myself that I no longer just want players to just show off, because that's really what gets you up off your seat, isn't it?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, because I think that, if I'm being completely honest about it, the best football that I think I saw as a West Ham fan for a sort of like a sustained period of time, where we had good football, but we was also actually quite strong, especially at home, was under Harry Redknapp.
Yeah.
You know, he kicked out some good teams. Yes, I know, as we referenced earlier, there was a little bit of a revolving door policy. You know, sling as much mud as you can at the wall. Some of it's bound to stick at some point, sort of thing. Some worked, some didn't, but he always tried to get players in with a little bit of flair, mixed with a little bit of steel as well. John Moncur, for example, being a case in point, a player that could play football but could also mix it up a bit when needed. Yet, you know, David Moyes, possibly is more a manager, you know, that likes to have players with a little bit more steel than the flair, if you will. So he's kind of the reverse of Redknapp.
I'm glad you said that about Redknapp, because a lot of West Ham fans are really cynical about him now. They don't like him for various reasons. I guess one of the main ones is that he later went on to manage Spurs.
Yeah.
But if you were there, you can't deny it that we had some bad times, but we had some absolutely brilliant times in Upton Park under Harry Redknapp. Such memorable performances and some of the best atmospheres as well, because the kind of teams he put out there almost like generated an atmosphere amongst the crowd, because the sort of players he purchased, Moncur's a good example, you know, the sort of players he brought in, they were just sort of very passionate players a lot of the time. And I really, my memories of the Harry Redknapp era are just fond ones. But I do sometimes feel in the minority, because a lot of West Ham fans will slag him off for all these different reasons, whether it's to do with the way he spent money, or whether he went to Spurs, or all these things, or Billy Bonds. But the 90s and you know, the early noughties, they were a great time to be a West Ham fan a lot of the time, even though we weren't winning anything, but we had some great seasons. We had a great run in the Intertoto, and I enjoyed it. And I'd also say that, you know, I've interviewed and spoken with Harry Redknapp on several occasions over the years, and you can't get away from the fact that he is an extremely nice, charismatic bloke. When you meet him, he's personable. He's got time for everyone. And that's not the case with everyone in football or in life. So I'm glad that you're a fan too, because I definitely am. But sometimes I don't say it.
No, like I say, I've got a lot of time for Harry. I know, like I say, you referenced it. A lot of people have a bit of a downer on him because he managed Spurs. You know, the sort of like the media image that was portrayed of him as a little bit of a wheeler dealer, which I know is not a phrase that he likes to have attributed to him. Because
I can understand that, because that's prejudice, and it's a lot of it's to do with the way he speaks, and that's just prejudice like any other, I think. And you know, we're all Londoners, and actually, he's getting a little bit of prejudice there for being a Londoner with a London accent, and so people pander to like weird stereotypes from Minder or something like that, and it's really unfair, because, you know, I mean, God, I hated it when he succeeded with Spurs, but you know, the truth is, he got Spurs to the Champions League semi-finals. You know, you don't do that if all you are is a wheeler dealer.
Yeah, and he always tried to set up wherever he was, whether it was at Bournemouth, whether it was at West Ham, whether it was at Spurs, Portsmouth, wherever. He would always try and set his teams up to play on the front foot.
Absolutely,
and sometimes it could be to the detriment of
sometimes you just get battered. But it was
we're
always
there to be
fun,
entertained.
wasn't it? Yeah. So it was always fun. I mean, it was a lot more fun than the Sam Allardyce era, I would say.
Don't.
Yeah.
Don't. Not fun at all. Anyway, so You're halfway through your mountain. We've had a little bit of a diverge off, but we
Yeah.
often do that on this channel, and it's absolutely fine. We love it. So we got Mark Warden, we got Hugo Porfirio, we got 2 more heads to carve into the mountainside, Sam. So where are we going now, and why?
Well, I'm going to carve in another boy of '86 and another diminutive figure from the boys of '86, and he was absolutely my childhood hero above all others, Tony
Snap.
Cotty.
Yeah,
Tony Cotty. Sometimes I think it's cooler to say that Frank McAvenny was your hero because he, looking back when you get older, you think, oh, he was the one with the sort of, wide boy reputation, all the rest of it. And I suppose Tony Cotty, by comparison, is like the goody two shoes, the Roy Race figure, boy next door. But I think it's just to do with the fact that I remember listening on the radio when I would have been 8. And Tony Cotty's come on, played against Spurs, and scored on his debut at 17.
Yep.
And I didn't even know what he looked like, but and I don't think I didn't go to West Ham till I was 9, I don't think. So I don't think I'd ever actually been, but I already had West Ham stuff all over my walls and a West Ham shirt. And I was just like thrilled by the idea that someone who seemed like a kid, do you know what I mean, had come on and scored against Tottenham.
Yeah.
And I was hooked on him from that moment onwards because it is Roy Race stuff. It's the stuff of comics, and his whole West Ham career felt a bit like that. It was a shame he never won anything. And I just absolutely loved him. In many ways, he wasn't like those other players that I reference love him because he was never a flair player. He was a fox in the box.
Yeah,
but it didn't matter. He just always. Yeah, when he was on the pitch, you always thought Cotty will score. He will score for us. And I just had him on my, on the wall, on my exercise books, everything. I was torn up when he went to Everton. And then by the time he came back again, I was a teenager and I was absolutely thrilled when he came back again. And he did all right the second time around. And again, like you said about Wardy, but to an even greater, I mean, you talk about Mr. West Ham. People often say that about Billy Bonds or Mark Noble. There's been a lot, but Cotty is certainly Mr. West Ham in terms of his love for the club.
Absolutely.
You won't meet almost any player, I think, who's as West Ham obsessed. Tony Cotty's more obsessed with West Ham than we are. And that's rare. Usually it's the fans who are balmy and the players are a little bit more feet on the ground, down to earth about it. But Cotty is just like he regards West Ham the same as he did when he was a kid, I think. Just pure excitement and love.
Yeah. He was my first footballing hero. I mean, I've had a few down the years, Julian Dix and Paolo Di Canio, but Tony Cotty was my first footballing hero because I was there on the 25th of October, 1983, Milk Cup, second round, second leg, West Ham United 10, Bury 0, and he scored 4 goals that night. And from that moment on, he was my hero. You imagine that, I was there on my dad's shoulders. I was there. I was there on my dad's shoulders. Nighttime game, midweek, October, bit dark, bit damp, whatever.
Yeah.
Crowd was a bit sparse from memory. He gets 4 goals. We get 10. You can imagine, Sam, I'd have been 7 going on 8. Yeah, I was 7 going on 8. I went away from there thinking that I'd just seen the best team in the world, and Tony Cotty was like the world's greatest striker. Now, all right, I later found out that West Ham weren't the greatest team in the world, sadly. But to me, Tony Cotty was the greatest striker in the world. A goal scorer. I don't think we've had a pure goal scorer like him, other than possibly Jermaine Defoe. I think he's the only one that I think is comparable in terms of being just an out-and-out goal scorer.
You don't really get them anymore, though, do you?
No.
But I don't even think, because players aren't even coached like that anymore. Like you don't get specialists really anywhere in the team. Like in midfield, a midfielder has to be like Alan Devonshire and Billy Bonds all rolled into one now, If you look at City's players, that's what they're like, and it's the same with strikers. You don't just have it used to just be, well, you got a big one, right? He'll win the headers and he plays next to a little one who's quick and finishes them off. But now strikers have to be everything. So you just don't get specialists. And he was very much that, wasn't he? I don't know if there would be a role for a player like Tony Cotty in modern football.
Possibly not. Possibly not. Do you know what really, just slightly veering off of topic, although not totally. Do you know what really bugs me in football?
What?
The phrase false nine.
Oh,
It's the only position that you go, oh, right, that's not a striker that's playing as a striker. He's a false nine. You don't ever turn around and say, when someone's filling in at right back, you don't ever go, oh, he's a false two.
Yeah.
What is that about?
I don't know. To be honest, mate, as I get older, I'm like you. I find that term sort of irritating, but a lot of new innovative terms, tactical kind of terms, that the overcomplication or like the intellectualization of football is, I find it annoying. It makes me grumpy. It's probably because I'm getting old, but I think my attitude is part of why we love football is that it's simple, it's exciting, and occasionally it can be beautiful too. But it's the simplicity in a way that makes it so exciting and beautiful. And I feel that like maybe there's a new generation of football fan who feels as if they have to make it, I don't know why, but they feel as if they need to make it feel a little bit more like an American sport, and there needs to be a huge depth of analysis to it. But the game hasn't changed. It's still 11 men against 11 men. That's it, right? Or women. It's 11 people versus 11 people, and it's who scores the most goals. And there's only so many things you can do with 11 players. Do you know what I mean? There's only so many formations you can do. And so I think a lot of it is just bullshit, you know?
Yeah.
Overcomplication. People want to make it seem more kind of intellectual than it is. But, you know, it's not. It's just a game.
One of the things, as I said earlier, I have met Mark Ward a couple of times on the player events, and he said it a couple of times now, and he's right, where he's turned around and said about some of the sort of like the modern terminology. You know, he'll turn around and say about, oh, they talk about, you know, high press and all the rest of it. He turned around and said, we was doing that back in 85, 86. It might not have been called a high press.
Yes,
we referred to it as, you know, closing down whatever, but it's essentially the same thing. It's just they've reinvented the language, like you said, to make themselves,
to make it sound fancier. And it's not just the coaches or the people within the game. I think it's fans like it as well. You know, there's younger fans who love to apply all of this stuff to, you know, to a game that is it's essentially the same game it's ever been.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Just before we go on to the fourth player, because it is a little bit of a pet hate of mine. I remember there was a match on Sky Sports. I can't even remember who it was, but they had Graham Souness and Alex Scott sat next to one another. And Alex Scott was sort of like chatting away, and she referenced, and I'd never heard the expression before in my life, and clearly Graham Souness never had. I mean, Graham Souness, three-time European champion, and God knows how many times he's won the what was then the first division, not the Premier. There was football before the Premier League, children. She turned around and used the phrase low block, and the look on Graham Souness's face was like, what are you on about?
Yeah.
What are you on about? And she turned around, she was like, a low block, Graham. I was like, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, she's coming across as really fucking patronising to a guy that's done what he's done in the game. And it's like, I can see the wheels turning, and he's just sort of like, oh, okay. And he's just left it there.
Mind you, it doesn't take that much to irritate Graham Souness, does it?
Well, you can say that. I couldn't possibly comment. But yeah, I mean, sort of like low block, it's sitting deep. That's all it is. It's just sort of like you're just rebranding it. Same concept.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There you go. Anyway, back on the page. How many times we divert off on this channel? It's ridiculous. So that's 3 done, Mr. Delaney. We've got Mark Ward, we've got Hugo Porfirio, and we've got now Tony Cotty that's been added to that list. You've got one choice, and your hands are in absolute pieces by now. But you've got to go, and you know, I'm footing the ladder for you. So
no, I said I'd do it. I said I'd do it. So you know, if I start a job, I like to try and finish it. And my final player is Trevor Sinclair.
Ooh, controversy.
Trevor Sinclair is a player who I think has never had as much, you know, he was popular. He was very popular at the club. But boy, during that era we were talking about, the Redknapp era, he was so good. And I feel that he was overshadowed by being in the same team as. Well, I think originally he was in the same team as the sort of Hartson and Kitson team, which was kind of a big revival moment for West Ham, where Redknapp first kind of totally turned us round when we looked finished, and he rebuilt us completely by signing those players. But also coming in a bit under the radar in the same time was Trevor Sinclair, who'd had a great start to his QPR career, but then looked as if he was washed up a bit. It was a classic Redknapp signing where he spots something in someone. He thinks, no, I still think I can get the best out of them. And sometimes, a number of times, not just at West Ham, but certainly in particular at Portsmouth, he was really good at bringing those players back who looked like they might have lost their way and rediscovering something in them. Trevor Sinclair wasn't that old when we signed him, of course, but there's something had gone wrong. There was rumours that he'd just put on too much weight at QPR and he wasn't. And he signed him, and Trevor Sinclair was absolutely. I remember his debut against Everton at Upton Park, and one of the reasons I remember it is he scored twice, which a lot of people will remember about his debut. But I was standing next to this big, really sort of aggressive skinhead, like an old school skinhead that you would have got in the 70s. But this was the 90s, so I don't know what he was doing there. Maybe he'd lost his way, but he was being very aggressive and intimidating. And I had a hot cup of tea in my hand when Sinclair scored, and this bloke next to me shot his arms up in the air to celebrate, and it knocked the scalding cup of hot tea right in my face. To be honest with you, though, it just goes to show, don't always judge a book by its cover, because I thought, this bloody big skinhead, he's not teeing me, and he's not going to take kindly to me shouting at him about it. He was so apologetic and kind, and was like getting tissues and that him down. He felt awful about it.
No.
So, but I always remember that. Like, it was a sort of a lot of people will remember that because any player who scores a brace on his debut is very memorable. But I have the extra sensory memory of hot tea going in my face. But then Sinclair, I thought throughout that era, he was first overshadowed a little bit by Hartson and Kitson, and then by Di Canio. And he played with Di Canio. Of course, he got the assist for that famous goal against Wimbledon.
Fantastic ball in, wasn't it?
And then on top of that, he was in the same team where all the youngsters came through, Joe Cole and Frank and Rio and all of that stuff. And he was there throughout all these different teams. And he was consistently in our top 2 or 3 best players in every game he played in. He was incredibly consistent. He was really exciting to watch. I don't mean he was consistent in a dull way. Like sometimes people go, James Milner, Jordan Henderson, they're consistent players, aren't they? No, he was consistently exciting to watch. He was extremely fast. He could score. He got assists. A brilliant winger, just like talking about Mark Ward earlier or about Jared Bowen today, who was actually quite a similar player to Trevor Sinclair. Trevor Sinclair also had that work rate that Bowen's got, and he'd often play right wing back, left wing back. Then he got into the England squad as well. And I remember he played in that game against Argentina in the Japan World Cup where we beat 1-0, and he played really well. And you know what it's like in a World Cup when there's a West Ham player playing, you kind of just have player cam. Your eyes are just player cam on the West Ham player. That's like I'm like with Declan Rice now. And I remember that game. He was absolutely brilliant for England. I loved Trevor Sinclair as a player. I thought he was, Di Canio got a lot of the plaudits, but I tell you what, Sinclair was, I don't know what his goal scoring record was like in comparison to Di Canio's, but it must have been similar. And I suppose he didn't have that same kind of fiery personality that Di Canio had, which gave him so much attention. But I always loved Sinclair a lot. I even named my fantasy football team after it one year, which was a really bad pun, which was, I can sing clearly now, the rain has gone.
Brilliant.
Mind you, when it's shit puns to do with West Ham players, I'm talking to the right guy.
Love it. I love it.
Right. And anyway, he did get a bit of grief the other week, and I felt bad for him because, to be honest, I'm on a West Ham player or fan side in any situation. And I always loved him as a player. And so I felt bad for him that he made a bit of a mistake and got a kicking for it. So that's one that I thought, well, let's just remember what a legendary player he was, because he really was.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody, makes errors here and there, But as far as a player's concerned, if we concentrate on that, you just asked about his goal scoring record. Well, for us, he got 37 league goals in 177 appearances, and let's have it right. It's not like he was playing as a striker. He was a lot of the time, like you say, he might have been a wing back, he might have been a winger, he might have been a second striker. He was very, very versatile. And you mentioned it earlier, the Canio goal. Well, look at the ball from Sinclair.
The ball is sublime. It's a sublime cross-field ball, and it just falls. I'm not saying it was easy for Canio, like a tap-in, but Jesus, what a pass! Yeah, it was. He was a wonderful player, Sinclair, and he doesn't get the praise I think that he deserves. Sometimes you think of the amount of teams he played through, the amount of years he played for, the amount of players he played with, but he always was in the team, no matter what. He always scored goals consistently. He's a great player, and he played up front, played on both wings, played in both wing back positions as well. Can't remember if he ever played centre mid, but I wouldn't have been surprised.
Yeah, very, very versatile player and played to a high quality. I mean, I remember when we signed him, same as you do, Sam, the Everton game, he got 2 goals. I think, if I remember rightly, it was a 2-2 draw from memory.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah. And before that, it might have been a couple of years earlier, but he'd scored a goal for QPR. And when I saw it, I went, my
against
goodness.
Barnsley. That was really how he announced himself to the world, to football, really, in this country, wasn't it? Because they'd signed him from Blackpool.
Yeah.
And my brother's a QPR fan. And he was like, we've got this kid from Blackpool. He's amazing. He's going to play for England. And I was like, yeah. He's always saying this. This is what you said about Gary Bannister. Look what happened to him. Right. And so you're going on about it, and then match of the day, he's like, right, you remember what I told you? Well, you're going to see it in action tonight. And sure enough, it was amazing, wasn't it? I mean, it was like it was basically an overhead kick, but from the edge of the area. If you haven't seen it, if you're a younger viewer, and you haven't seen it, you might be familiar with Wayne Rooney's bicycle kick against Manchester City about whenever that was, 10, 12 years ago. This was like that, but it was better because it was from further out. And also, unlike Rooney, he caught it with his foot and not his shin.
Shin it. Yeah, and that was a cracking goal. And when we signed him, I was like, yeah, and you're right. He'd lost his way at QPR, I think. I think from memory, because again, he was at one of the player events that I went to. I think he might have got injured and just it just went a little bit pear-shaped from there on in. Yeah. And he needed something to reinvigorate his career. Harry Redknapp pulled him in. 2 goals on debut. And if I remember correctly, I don't think that we'd had anyone score a brace on debut from the time that he did it against Everton to when Jesse Lingard made his debut away at Aston Villa and scored 2 goals. So I think that there was that much time between a debutant scoring a brace. So what he did is something that doesn't very often happen in our history, to come in and make that instant impact. But just looking here, I mean, he was at the club, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons. Fantastic servant in claret and blue. Like I say, multiple positions. He got his reward in 2002. It was a little bit out of the misfortune of Danny Murphy that he got the call up to the England squad in 2002. Then, obviously, latterly, it was then Owen Hargreaves that got injured, which then allowed him to get promoted from a squad player.
He flew back and forth to Japan something like 3 times in a day, didn't he?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And then he still got off the plane and played a blinder a few hours later against Argentina. What a legend.
Yeah. I remember watching that in a pub where was I? It was in Banstead in Surrey. I was working around there at the time. And of course, because it was in Japan and Korea, the matches were on at all sorts of weird, wonderful times. And I was in a pub in Banstead. I think it was called the Woolpack, if I remember correctly, because I remembered sort of like thinking of Emmerdale. And I was in there watching it. And like you say, when you're a West Ham fan and you've got a West Ham player that's got the 3 Lions on at a major tournament, the World Cup, you just have that little bit more of a vested interest in the match than you otherwise would, because one of your players is out there, sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know, if he wasn't there, I'd be a little bit less, you know, because he was there. I'm like, come on.
Yeah,
And he played
absolutely.
so well.
Well, that's it. I mean, for me, I'm West Ham first, everything else second, and that's why, you know, I felt for him recently when he was getting stick. But it's the same reason why when I'm watching England, I'm cheering the West Ham player above and beyond the England team.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? If you're
Absolutely.
West Ham, I'm on your
Yeah.
side. I'm backing you almost no matter what.
Yeah.
You know, if you're West Ham, I stand by you.
Yeah, you're my player. So
Yeah.
you know, yeah. So there you go, Mr. Delaney. You've done the fourth head. You've chipped it away at this cliffside, this mountainside. And I'm now, for the viewer at home, I'm now going to peel back the curtain to reveal your handiwork. Look.
Whoa, what a beautiful job I've done.
That is absolutely incredible. Look at that. That is Mark Ward, Hugo Porro, Tony Cotty, and Trevor Sinclair, ladies and gentlemen. That is, now, like I say, Sam, before I put this concept to him, he knew nothing about stonemasonry, but he's been up that ladder. He's done a crash course on YouTube in stonemasonry. Look at that detail, ladies and gentlemen. That is absolutely tip-top stonemasonry, Mr. Delaney.
I'm pleased with that. I got to say, I'm pleased with it. I'd like to be modest, but I'm not going to be. I've done a cracking job. You have. And Mr. Delaney, I would like to thank you very much indeed for you giving up your time. And as I say, I'd also like to extend the invite that if you should so wish, if you should have some time free and you want to maybe attack another genre and do a bit more stonemasonry, our door is always open. I'll wait for my hands to heal and then I'll be back.
Sounds like a plan. Sam, I do appreciate it. And those of you watching, please don't forget to like, comment on, and share the stream to your social media platforms. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, and hit that bell icon for alerts on new content. As always, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for your support. Sam, there's just one thing I've got to ask you, my friend. What are we?
Massive.
That'll do me. Come on, you Irons.
Come on, you Irons.
The West Ham Massive are pleased to support Iron Supporting Food Banks. They are a group of West Ham fans and friends inspired by the work of other football food banks around the country. They collect food and cash donations for Newham Food Bank in Beckton, who supplies 7 distribution centres in the borough 7 days a week and hand out several hundred 3-day emergency food packs every month to families in need. They are also working with other groups to improve conditions for vulnerable adults and children in the Newham community. You can help by making a donation to their Just Giving page. You will find the link to this in the description section of the video details in this stream. Thanks for your support. Come on, you Irons.